Great, thank you so much. I'm going to review the international and policies moving forward in the United States, and also the recommendations of governments around the world related to wireless and cell phone radiation. And I will make these slides available to you, of course, with links, because I'm going to fly over some critical policies. I want to start out by talking about what is making headline news here in the United States. And I'm going to share with you a video from the Chicago Tribune on cell phone tests that were done that found that when the phone is tested in positions close to the body, that they exceed the regulatory limits.
Still, we at the Chicago Tribune wondered, how much radiation exposure do phones really cost? We bought more than a dozen phones and had them tested by an accredited lab using standard procedures. To test each one, the lab owner uses a special mixture of fluids that mimics the electrical properties of the body. He poured that into a fiberglass tub. Then he secured a phone underneath the tub and set it to operate at full power. A robotic arm dipped up and down in the fluid, measuring the amount of radiation it was absorbing. There were two main things we wanted to know. First, would the phones meet the safety limit if tested at the same distance from the body as the manufacturer's own testing? It turned out that some phones exceeded the limit. Next, we noticed that federal rules allow phone manufacturers to test phones up to 25 millimeters away from the simulated body. That's nearly an inch. The rules reflect times when many people carried their phones in belt clips or even holsters, not that close to the body. So our second question was, what if phones were tested at a smaller distance to reflect how people carry their phones today, like in a pocket? This is crucial. Typically, the farther away a phone is away from simulated tissue, the less exposure to radiation. So we moved the phones in closer to 2 millimeters, or less than 1/10 of an inch. At this distance, radiation exposure often exceeded the same distance.
So there have been multiple tests done, both the Chicago Tribune, the law firm of Fagan Scott. Just recently, it made headline news. The Penumbra brands tested the Apple. Published data in the IEEE Access by Dr. Om Gandhi shows that the data from the French test, which Dr. Marc Arazi is going to be talking about, the ANFR tests, if you took that and converted it to the way the FCC does cell phone testing, that the cell phone SAR could be up to 11 times FCC limits. And then, of course, there was the CBC. So investigation, which also found cell phones exceed limits when tested, of course, in body contact positions. Because our test methods are so outdated, there have been many attempts in the United States to address this, because people are not aware that when the phone is in a body contact position, and of course in a position of high power, that it can exceed limits. So most recently, Berkeley, California passed the cell phone right to know ordinance, and I would say that was in 2015. However, it was immediately slapped with a lawsuit by the wireless industry, and the U.S. Supreme Court denied the industry appeal of this ordinance and effectively upheld the decision to maintain this ordinance. And what it does is, at the point of sale when you buy the phone, people are informed that cell phones emit radio frequency, and that if you carry or use your phone in a pants or shirt pocket or tucked into a bra, as many people do here, when the phone is on, you can exceed federal guidelines for exposure to radio frequency. Now, in the United States, the National Toxicology Program, I know the study has been presented here, but the scientists of the National Toxicology Program state online on the website, there's a Q&A, and they state that as they have become more aware of their usage, that they follow recommendations to reduce exposure to cell phone radiation. They reduce the time on the cell phone and use speaker mode or a headset to place more distance So in terms of international policies, we have on our website on ehtrust.org many countries and what they are doing. And France is an example. Although there is a ways to go, they have policies in place which I think can serve as a model. I know Israel has some of these as well. Since 2010, there is a ban on cell phones made for children under 6, as well as in Belgium. They have the ANSYS, the health agency, has issued several reports, and most recently, although 2016, they are recommending that they're addressing that the regulations in terms of transparency are also addressing all kinds of wireless devices, not only cell phones. There was a 2006 decree, of which we have on our website as well, on the protection of workers, calling for special protections for pregnant women and limiting exposure. There was 2015 legislation, Wi-Fi banned in nursery school. The wireless is turned off as the default setting in schools. Cell tower emission measurements are accessible to the public. They have regulations related to advertising so that it is clearly and visibly mentioning how to reduce exposure. And there need to be headsets offered, especially if children, if buyers request it for children. They also have, of course, cell phones banned in schools through 14 years old. And most recently, recommendations on labeling, which include, in addition to reducing exposure, keep away from the belly of pregnant women and keep away from the lower abdomen of adolescents. And now, of course, there is an investigation into the health effects of 5G, which is due in 2021. There's a preliminary report online. This is the public information campaign in Cyprus, and this is the back of a bus, and I'm going to read you the translation. Learn how to protect me, don't irradiate me. And there is videos that you can watch online that we have translated on our YouTube as well, and so has the Cyprus Committee on Environment and Children's Health. They also have a rather extensive brochures on how to reduce exposure. In addition, the Archbishop Macarius Hospital has removed the wireless in the pediatric units, and parents are educated to keep phones away from children and out of the pediatric units. All of these, I wanted to put just a grid just to show some examples of some policies around the world. There are, of course, many countries, Israel as well, that has lower ELF, EMF limits when it comes to homes and schools. Over 20 countries have official recommendations to reduce cell phone radiation to the head, especially for children. There are cell tower network limits below ICNIRP, bans on mobile phones to children, bans on the sale of phones designed for children, and labeling laws as well. And we have, again, all of this on our website. And while there are many countries that recommend very clearly reducing exposure to children, they are not all the same in what their other policies are. And I wanted to show this example of French Polynesia, which has a short 1-minute video, and they talk about not only cell phone to the head, the Wi-Fi router, the wireless gaming devices, which also expose you to radio frequency. And they also have in their recommendations how to reduce exposure to ELF, to lower frequency electromagnetic fields. In the United States, the Maryland State Children's Environmental Health and Protection Advisory Council, which is a 19-member expert organization, recommends reducing exposure to Wi-Fi in schools. And especially when new schools are to be built, to have network cables added at the same time, which just makes sense because then you have the infrastructure in place for that. And this is a paper that I co-authored along with Frank Craig, Margaret Sears, who I know is presenting, and Dr. Miller, which has recommendations on building, healthy building in terms of lowering radio frequency radiation in building by eliminating sources, and also summarizes the science I just wanted to point out. So in the United States, on one side is from San Francisco, their Right to Know ordinance that was passed in 2010, which the wireless industry filed legal action against, and they ended up not implementing those recommendations, although they still have online information for people to reduce exposure. The Connecticut Department of Health, as well as the California Department of Health, are two state departments which have recommendations on why and how to reduce exposure to cell phone radiation in the United States. And then our American Academy of Pediatrics has repeatedly written to the federal government on reviewing our outdated regulations on cell phones and radio frequency, talking about children's unique vulnerability to cell phone radiation, and also calling on the government to have both compliance testing and regulations that reflect real world use in positions close to the body. Children are handed cell phones as toys, and they rest on their chest, on their abdomen. Some people, of course, don't have corded lines at all at home, and we don't have adequate regulations in place. They also have information on cell towers, and on the American Academy of Pediatrics website on electromagnetic fields, they talk about the research on cell towers, and I just have up here some text from their website. The AAP has a website called Healthy Children, and they talk about studies on living near mobile phone base stations, which have increased the risk for headaches, memory problems, dizziness, depression, sleep problems. And I will have this available to you so you can find that as well. There are many medical organizations worldwide recommending reducing exposure. And from the Vienna Medical Association, the Cyprus Medical Association, the Athens Medical Association, and of course, around the world in various ways, talking about how to reduce exposure, and all of that is also online on our website. Now, when it comes to 5G, there have been several recent appeals. I'm sure you've heard of the 5G appeal. Now, I believe the signatories are up to 269 scientists and medical doctors calling for a halt to 5G. The Belgium electrosmog appeal has been signed by doctors and health professionals calling for a halt to 5G. The Cyprus Medical Association, most recently in the United States, doctors and health practitioners signed on to a letter to President Trump calling for a moratorium on 5G, and in Italy as well. So we've been tracking that. The International Society of Doctors for the Environment also has a 5G appeal. And around the world, people are organizing on this issue at grassroots. This is from a picture from Switzerland, because of all of the research showing impacts at low levels. Now, in the United States, there are several state bills which have been passed establishing commissions or calling for investigations or calling for reports on the health and environmental impacts of 5G. I testified along with several experts, and this is ongoing, at the New Hampshire Commission on 5G, which is investigating this issue, calling in researchers around the world. And they had Dr. Michael Wyde from the National Toxicology Program to talk about the NTP study. And you can read the minutes online. as to the questions that they asked. And I think he made a very important point about the importance of the NTP, which I know Dr. Melnick has talked about, which is that there were non-thermal effects. A lot of people believe unless you heat tissues, you won't see health effects with radio frequency. This study disproves that, as we did not have overheating, but we did see damage. And in the United States, there are also many cities that have various ordinances around the placement of the wireless antennas facilities, the small cells, in residential areas. So in Los Altos, they have a prohibition of the small cells in the residential areas, in the public utility easements, separation distances from schools, setbacks for homes. In Italy, there are 154 local governments issuing resolutions to halt 5G, and this is a number that keeps increasing every time I check in on it, where mayors and cities, elected officials are calling to halt 5G until safety is shown. In Cyprus, the Kalamata was a test city, and they had initially signed an agreement to be a test city, and now they have decided not to renew the contract to be a 5G test pilot. In Switzerland, there have been resolutions by many localities, and then United Kingdom and Ireland. We have all of this on a section of our website on international actions to halt 5G. How many minutes do I have left? I don't have a timer here, so.
Another 5 minutes.
5, okay. This is just one of the many news reports on from Italy. And this is a mayor, and I just thought I would read his quote. "We're convinced that our territory is the exclusive habitat for psychophysical well-being, and we do not intend to endanger it with invasive and dangerous technologies, at least until a competent authorities attest to the health and safety of these new but unexplored technologies." And let's see if I can. And as I talked about, the French agency, the ANSYS, they actually came out with their first preliminary report on 5G, looking at research on the current frequencies that we have in use for wireless technologies. And their final report is due in 2021. And I just wanted to end with our Environmental Health Trust put together a short PSA on how to reduce exposure based on what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends. And I'll just play that for you.
Did you know that cell phone, the one in your pocket, emits radio frequency radiation? As long as your phone's turned on, even if you're not talking or texting.
The American Academy of Pediatrics, in over a dozen countries, recommends reducing children's exposure to wireless radiation.
When using a cell phone, I always keep it away from my body. I use speakerphone or a headset like this.
To stop microwave exposure, I put my phone on airplane mode and turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth function.
I hold the phone at a distance and make sure it's not touching my body.
Cell phones are not toys. Children's brains and bodies are still developing and are vulnerable to wireless radiation. Practice safe and responsible habits with yourself and your children.
When using the computer, I always try to make sure my connection is corded, not wireless.
Remember not to use your cell phone in the car. The phone works at higher power in metal surroundings and bounces around, increasing your family's radiation exposure.
For their safety.
For your safety.
Because children are more vulnerable.
Remind them.
Remind yourself.
To limit your microwave radiation exposures.
Did you know?
And we also have online, we have a various playlists of different public information videos like you just saw. We also have information on the impact in terms of energy use, and this is one of our downloads on climate change, 5G, the Internet of Things, because this massive increase in 5G equipment and devices is going to result in massive increases in energy use. And we link on this particular PDF to all of the research which is talking about this very issue and recommending, of course, drastically addressing this because of the energy consumption. I also wanted to point out the SHIFT project from this is a climate change transition expert group, and they also talk about our scenarios in terms of energy use, and we link to that as well. Recommendations for parents, public information for parents, and information for the general public on 5G to learn more about this issue. And all of this is on our website on ehtrust.org. So thank you so much.
Any question?
Yes. Hi, Theodore, can you hear me?
Yes.
Maya. I'm trying to filter the more authoritative reports from the less authoritative, and I was wondering if you have any collaboration or how do you consider, thank you. How do you consider the Bio Initiative report?
Well, the Bio-Initiative report compiles peer-reviewed and published research, and it is written by experts from around the world on the peer-reviewed science. You also can go online to their website and read summaries and abstracts. Dr. Henry Lai and Dr. Hardell keep that updated.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we now have yet another coffee break. Please, we'd like to reconvene on time because the next set of talks are all international. So we'll be back here by 3:45 precisely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Theodore.